Welcome back to the shop, everybody. Today's video takes place between May 9th and May 15th, which is week 19 of 2022. If you've been following along the past few videos, this will come as no surprise. We're continuing to work on wiring. Today we're wiring up the fuse box. I'm going to do kind of the same thing I did with the ECU, the Holley Dominator, is I'm going to read the wiring diagrams. I'm going to start grouping some wires together. I'm going to start routing some stuff in the car. And I'm just going to go through a whole pile of the old wiring just to understand it all. Just taping up the main power wire just to kind of get it out of the way while I'm working on the bench. So we're going to sit down, we're going to get to work. I moved the coffee off of the bench onto the teardown cart there just because I don't want to spill it over any of the paperwork or hit the fuse box or anything, so try and just keep it out of the way a bit. So what I'm doing is I'm just reading all the circuits and trying to understand what they all do. And what I'm doing right now is I'm undoing the top portion of the fuse box from the base. And the reason why I'm doing this is because I want to see which circuits are directly connected to the battery and which circuits are in the ignition, because I know that there's two separate circuits that are possible on this fuse box. What that means is that circuits that are on battery are powered all the time. So as long as the fuse box is hooked up to the battery, those circuits will have power. So usually that's going to be stuff like headlights, that's going to be four-way flashers. Usually your safety equipment is everything that has power all the time. And things that are on ignition, you know, your wipers for example. You don't need your wipers going all the time, so those will be on ignition. So I'm just trying to establish which circuits are which. And right about now, I'm pulling my head out of my ass thinking, what am I doing? Like, why am I looking at the wires? I have a multimeter. I can check continuity between each of the circuits and the battery cable, and that'll tell me if it's powered by the battery or not. So that's what I'm doing, checking which circuits are on battery, which are on ignition. And then I'm going to put this fuse box back together since I didn't actually need to undo any of the screws. I should mention on this specific fuse panel, there are, I believe, 4 circuits that you can specify they run on either battery or ignition, depending on how you have the fuse. Where the fuse installs has 3 slots. The 2 on the right are for, let's say, ignition, and then the 2 on the right will give you battery. So just by moving the fuse from one side to the other, you can specify how you want a circuit to activate. So I went with the Ron Francis wiring because I wanted to terminate all of the wires to length and build the entire harness on my own. I consider it a painless harness, but the difference is painless terminates all of the wires into fuse box. So if there's any wires you don't want to use, any circuits you don't want to use, you either have to cut them really short or coil the wires up and leave them under the dash. Whereas with the Ron Francis, I didn't have to do that. So again, like most of my other wiring videos, it's not going to be super exciting. I'm just reading diagrams, understanding stuff. Yeah, I don't know what else to say while I'm just sitting here looking at this stuff. Yeah, so there is actually something I can say about this. When I got this Ron Francis wiring diagram, it has a very specific way that it wants you to wire things. One example of that is coming off of the headlight switch, there's a wire that's supposed to go to the dimmer switch. And the dimmer switch is what toggles your high beams on and off. So what they want you to do is run the dimmer switch wire into the Ron Francis, and then out of the Ron Francis go somewhere else. Well, I'm doing a lot of factory wiring on this car, so the dimmer switch is built into my steering column turn signal switch. So I have the light out of the headlight switch that comes up into the dimmer switch that's on the steering column. Another thing they want you to do is they want you to run the neutral safety switch from the neutral safety switch into the Ron Francis and then out to your starter. Well, I'm not doing that. I'm just wiring direct from the ignition to the neutral safety switch and then out to the starter. So I'm not running it all the way back to my fuse box at the back of the car. It's just not needed. And so that's what part of everything that I'm doing here is I'm laying it out, I'm reading the diagrams, I'm understanding what I do and I don't need, and just going from there. So right now what you can see that I'm doing is I am checking which circuit is ignition, which is battery, and which wire goes to which fuse. Right here, I'm just trying to see how the fuse box is kind of built. I didn't get a good view. Yeah. So when you buy the Ron Francis harness, it comes with these bags of wires, and each bag is kind of grouped for a logical set of circuits. One's your ignition, one's your wiper feed, one's your headlight feed. So I'm just going through each bag, reading the instructions that came with it. This is a Ford kit, and yeah, figuring out what I do and I don't need. Some of these harnesses have pre-built connectors on them, and for the most part I'm terminating my entire harness myself. So I've removed the wires out of the harness, or I've just chopped the ends off. Same thing goes like the horn wire, for example. It's got a little connector on the end of it. I'm not using that. I actually ran the wire the other way, so I chopped that off. When you're wiring a car, you can go very simple or very extravagant. I'm on the extravagant side. I'm custom running all the wires. I'm terminating all the wires myself, cutting everything to length. Everything's going to be in a loom. It's going to be very pretty. None of that affects the function. A wire doesn't know what color it is, doesn't know that's how it's been routed. but this is just something that I want to do because I really enjoy electrical and I enjoy wiring, so I want to take my time and make it look nice and make it almost professional, I guess would be the best word, but just make it really nice. So what I'm starting to do here is this is the original ignition switch and all of the original wires that actually came out of the ignition switch to go to the fuse box or the starter or the O2 sensor. So what I'm doing is I'm referencing the original or the wiring diagram that I have access to, and I'm just labeling all the wires. And then what I can actually do is also look at the fuse box that came out of the car and, you know, compare where these wires go. So I'm going to know which wire on here goes to the starter to trigger the starter. I'm going to know which wire on here powers the fuse box. I know which wire on here is hot with crank, and that's very important. When I'm powering stuff like my ignition coils or my ECU, the Dominator, it needs power while cranking as well. So on this ignition switch, a couple of the wires, when you turn it to the start position, which is all the way forward, like on most cars, you lose power to the fuse box on some of the circuits because they don't need to be running while you're cranking. So it's very critical that you know which wire coming off that ignition switch is hot while you're cranking. So on my original wiring harness, there's yellow wires, there's gray and red wires, black and green, and a few other colors. And that package that I just had in my hand is I bought a new ignition wiring harness, and it comes with wires that are just yellow, black, and maybe one other color. But it also comes with these little like 6 to 8 inch short wires that are pre-terminated inside the bag, and I don't want those. I don't want to splice onto those wires. I want my wires to go from the fuse panel directly into that harness. So I actually went and I bought some, they're called Ford box female terminal ends, and I bought them for 2 gauges. I bought them for 14 to 16 gauge, and I bought them for 18 to 22 gauge. And I actually, you'll see this in one of my later videos, maybe this one, I don't know. But you'll actually see me terminate the wires directly into the harness with those ends. And that's just part of the little bit extra that I'm going. I could have just spliced them with butt splices and it would have worked just as well, but I didn't want to do that. I wanted it start to finish, a single wire, no connections, no splices. So as I mentioned here, I am looking at the fuse box, and I'm just looking at the wires that came off of the ignition switch. That's, I think, one of the gray and red ones. So just understanding how it all works in relationship to the ignition switch. So this bundle of wires here is my ignition wiring. So one of these wires needs to go direct to the battery, because that's what's going to feed the ignition switch. One of these wires is the ignition wire, and that goes to the fuse panel so that when the key is in the ignition position, it turns it on. The brown wire is the accessory wire, so when you turn the key back into accessory, it's going to turn on stuff like the stereo and, you know, stuff like that. And I don't think there's another wire in there. I think it's just the three that I'm running right now, the brown, the red, and the orange. So yeah, so I'm just starting to figure out some of the wiring and how this is going to run in the car itself. I know on the right side, I've kind of got the ECU wiring set up, and that's going to go to the engine bay through a through-panel stud. And then most of the rest of the wiring is going to go on the driver's side, and that's going to feed all of the car stuff. And that's also where stuff like the tail lights are going to run back from, or back down to go to the back of the car. So off the headlight switch, the tail lights will go from the headlight switch up the dash bar, down with all this bundle of wires all the way back to the car, and then all the way through to the back of the car and get wired there. So if I'm going to start routing wires to the ignition switch on the steering column, I should probably have that in the car. So that's just why I'm putting the steering column back into this. Now that I got the steering column back in the car, I can start getting these wires loosely into place and make sure that they're long enough to reach where I've got the fuse box. This next set of wire, if I recall correctly, the purple is probably the starter wire. I don't remember the blue. So the blue is either the headlight switch, maybe? So it's either headlight switch feed and wiper feed, or that's the starter feed and something else. I don't remember. I have to look it up. It's a little important to have the center column in, only because I need to know where to route the wires for the stereo and the radio memory, stuff like that. It does kind of get in the way a lot, but it doesn't hurt. It's also needed to have it in the car to make sure that where I'm routing the wires, when I put the center console in, it's not going to hit them or rub on them or anything like that. kind of the same thing that I'm doing with the seatbelts right now. I'm just loosely placing them in the car just to check and make sure that my planned wire routing path isn't going to interfere with the seatbelts at all. Because it would be horrible to, get all these wires run and terminate, and then all of a sudden I can't actually run it there because the seatbelt's in the way. So it looks like I'm pulling all the wires out of the car. Looks like I'm getting the garbage can set up, and I'm just gonna bundle these wires together. Alright, looks like the first bundle is done, so let's just put it back in the car. Alright, so we're going to move on to the next set of wiring, and you've already seen this, and I'm not going to talk anymore in this video. Enjoy. Well, everyone, that's where we're leaving this video off. Got a bunch more wiring done in the car. There's no end in sight for wiring. If you stuck around this long, I'd like to thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.